Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build a great team. Today, we're tackling the question of whether you need a coach and whether it's a smart investment for leaders at varying stages of their careers to pursue a coach relationship. Now, I'm excited about our topic today because it's relevant to so many people. And quite honestly, there are a lot of mysteries and misnomers around it. I was going to call the episode Coaching for Dummies, but I thought that might be a copyright violation of some sort and maybe even demeaning to my highly intelligent audience. So instead, I'm posing a really important question to each of you. And I'd like you to think about this during the course of our conversation. Do you need a coach? And to help us answer that question today and to unpack what coaching is all about is Dr. Gary Reinecke. Gary is a master certified coach with the International Coach Federation. He's the founder of InFocus. He holds a master coach certification credentials of the highest order, authored Christian Coaching Tools, Christian Coaching Excellence, Coaching One-on-One Handbook. He's just probably the most qualified person I can think of to speak on this topic. Gary lives in Murrieta, California with his wife, Gina. Together, they have two really accomplished, smart kids, Ivy League schools. That says something about Gary and Gina. So, Gary, enough of me rambling on here. Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike. And I appreciate the invitation. It's a real honor to be with you today. And I look forward to this conversation on a topic I'm obviously invested and passionate about.
You've been doing this a long time, haven't you, Gary? How many years have you been in this coaching world?
Yeah, I started in '86, and I've been doing it over 30 years. And over those 30 years, it has evolved from where I started to where it is today.
So let's sort of ground ourselves in some basics. Mm-hmm. We've all heard the term coaching. Some people have been coached. Probably some listeners are already coaches, but lay the foundation. What is coaching?
Let me start by sharing my coaching journey, Mike.
Okay.
Because I can give you a real quick explanation of coaching, but I think if you have my story as a backdrop, it'll help expand on your understanding of what coaching is, but also what it isn't.
Yeah, I love that.
So when I was first in ministry, I was fresh out of my master's training. I was 28 years old. And because of the unique experiences I had, I thought I had something to offer. Okay. And I'm saying that facetiously because I really had this vision to do what I'm doing today back when I was 28. And I'll explain a little bit of my background. So I came out of the not-for-profit space and primarily in the local church. So I grew up in a church that had a very well-known speaker. His name was John Maxwell. So I got oriented to leadership development at an early age. And then later I interned at a church that was planting churches and was part of a church planting team. So I thought with that experience when I graduated, that I really had something to offer, especially in that not-for-profit space, working with local churches and pastors. What I didn't know at that juncture was really what coaching was. It didn't really have a name at that point, but what I started to do, I observed other people who were doing kind of what I wanted to do, but it was called consulting, all right? And Obviously, consulting is an industry, but it's very different than coaching. So what I would do, and initially I was just observing, I would observe the consultant go into an organization, do an analysis, and then based on his analysis, report the findings in a written and oral report. So I thought that's what I wanted to do with my life. So I actually was trained in consulting, and then I started to work with a couple of churches through a process that involved diagnosis and planning. After I did that for a couple of years, I realized there was a missing component, okay? And the missing component was in the implementation of that work that we did on the plan. So you would put this really nice plan together, it would go on a shelf, but no one was there to come alongside the pastor and the team to help implement.
Yeah, because the coach had moved on at that point. The consultant had moved on.
Correct.
They parachuted in. May have done extraordinary work and gave this wonderful plan. I bet the PowerPoints all look great, but then when they leave, who's actually going to execute on that plan and sustain it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned something that's real important. The plan was generated by the consultant in conjunction with the people in the organization, but it was really the consultant's plan. It wasn't owned by the people, therefore it just sat on the shelf in many instances. So that got me to thinking, and I was part of an organization that was actually creating these incubators for people who wanted to start up new churches. And as a part of this incubator, we would provide coaching to help the new church pastor start up a church that was well established with all the building blocks of a healthy church. But we would do this over a period of time. So we would meet as a group once a month, and then in between we would have these coaching appointments to help them really implement what they had learned in the group sessions. Now, that was back in the late 80s. Since then, coaching has morphed into a multi-billion-dollar industry, okay? And the reason why is because coaching is all about establishing a trusting relationship and then help the leader discover what it is that they need to do, regardless of what the focus is, and then take the next step, either in their personal or organizational development. A synonym for coaching is empowerment. How can you empower people? One leader compared coaching to mentoring, which I would also say would be the same as consulting. A coach comes alongside and draws out. A mentor or a consultant goes before and pours in.
Okay.
Let me just unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So the coach comes alongside a leader, so a business owner, an executive. And by listening and asking questions, we're helping that leader reflect in a different way on a deeper level. And we're making some assumptions that that leader has what that leader needs right then in order to take the next step in order to reach their objective. And it may be a conversation, it may be a resource, it may be a planning process, whatever it is, we believe that leader will have that insight and they don't need someone from the outside in most cases to tell them what to do. Conversely, a mentor or consultant has this experience and it probably worked really successful in their context. And with that experience, they're going to now pour that into the leader and hope that that fits that leader's context. And maybe because that consultant is a little bit more concerned about follow through, they might come alongside as they implement. But their job is really done. Once they give the silver bullet, they've provided the wisdom that they have, and then they typically step back from the situation. So let me, in real simple terms, explain what coaching is. Coaching is an intentional relationship with a purpose, helping you discern what the next step is in your development as a person or your organizations. And this can apply, to macro kind of change where visionary leaders who are introducing a new business initiative need to think through the change management process, or micro change, small steps that taken over time have a strategic impact. So it has all sorts of implications when it comes to your business and your development as a leader.
Gary, one more time, give us that soundbite definition of coaching, because I think it's really good. I want to make sure people hear it. And then I have a comment about it. So that simple definition of coaching again is
a relationship with a purpose. And we could put the word intentional, an intentional relationship with a purpose to help the person discern the next steps and to take action.
Now, who's the owner of the action? Who's the owner of the insight that comes out of that relationship? Maybe even who's the owner of that relationship with a coach? I have a sense for what your answer is going to be, but what is your answer?
Yeah, the owner of the insights and the actions that are going to come out of that relationship is the client. The coach is there to do two things: to listen carefully and ask questions. And then based on that, the client is going to come up with their own insights that they now will take action on, because they've now owned what those insights are and the actions that go with it.
And when we own something, we're more inclined to take better care of it.
Yes.
Because, who washes and waxes the rental car before they return it to Hertz or Avis? We don't own that car, so we don't take care of it. And when we own something, we're more inclined to take initiative, to be accountable for what happens, because it's us, it's ours.
Right. And I like to use the analogy of parenting. I bet most of your listeners are parents or have been parents. And when we were
had parents,
when we were in the early child rearing years, we had a parent-child relationship. We needed to tell our children what to do and what not to do. But as they matured, it became more and more apparent that unless they really owned whatever it is that they needed to do, that there would not be as much action as we had hoped. I bet we have about a 50-50 chance of telling our adult children what to do than if they discover it for themselves.
Boy, and everyone who has adult children is saying amen to that right now.
Yeah.
So, Gary, a lot of your experience is in the church world and developing nonprofit leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Does this all translate to the business leader as well?
Absolutely. And I did have that same question. Many years ago, I was leading a workshop. One of the participants there was the VP of the second largest wine distribution company in the world. And as we debrief the triad exercise, where each person gets a chance to be coached, to coach, and then to observe, I asked him what that experience was like for him. And he made this statement. He said, "This was the most profound experience I've ever had." And all we did was ask people to listen, summarize, and ask questions. And this was the most profound experience that he had ever had. So I circled back around with him. His name's Glenn. And I asked him more about that comment that he said. And he said that this was something that he had never experienced before. And then I talked to him a little bit more about his business. And as the second largest wine distribution company in the world, they have quite the plant up in Northern California. And he was struggling to get his supervisors to take ownership of their area. And that also trickled down to the people on the front line, because they took grapes from crush all the way to packaging and shipping. So from A to Z. So you had people in supervisory relationships that were typically machinists. that had been promoted to supervisor. So they had the hard skills, but they didn't have the soft skills of supervision. So he asked me to come in and introduce a different way of working with their teams, beginning with a senior leadership team, and begin to push that down the organization. So over a 3-year period, we started out with a smaller group and expanded that over those 3 years. We shifted the way the supervisors interacted with their team to become more coach-like rather than a boss who's telling them what to do. So that shifted the play field for the supervisors, where now they were really engaging their team in their own learning and then challenging them to step up their performance. And it made a significant impact over those 3 years. Now they have self-led teams that the supervisors are coaching with their team members.
So, Gary, that raises a couple of questions for me, and I'm going to throw them out there and let you respond in whatever order you'd like. So, coaching is not just for senior executives. I think when we, oftentimes at least, people will hear the word executive coaching. And if you're not an executive, you're not near the top of the house, you don't have VP in front of your name or senior VP in front of your name, it suggests that coaching isn't for you. So my question is, who is coaching for? And then the other part of the other question I have that you can address is, so you can teach managers how to act like coaches or lead like coaches or supervise like coaches with their direct reports through a style of management or a style of leadership. So I'll let you respond to both those.
Okay. I think the first question I'll tackle is, coaching is not just for senior executive. It is for anyone who wants to grow and develop as a leader or their organization. So let me kind of break that down a little bit. So it is for executives, CEOs, VPs, COOs. Area where they might need coaching is on creating a vision and implementing it across the organization. So I coach an executive director in Malaga, Spain. He's responsible for 500 employees. And he has a vision that he's trying to get alignment across his organization, international organization. That's a place where coaching becomes very, very helpful. A second place would be the small business owner, 2 to 49 employees, and how they're going to benefit from coaching might be in maximizing employee engagement that leads to real business outcomes. So how can you engage people in their own development so that they take responsibility for their job and then begin to develop the other people around them? So I worked with a supervisor in a situation in a small business like this, and it really did engage the employees at a very different level than what they had done previously. And then I think the third category would be supervisors, anyone who's responsible for a team of 2 to 15 people or more. So it can help in creating a learning culture, managing effective team meetings, and implementing powerful one-to-ones. And I've worked in those scenarios with people at that level within organizations. So it does have a real application for the top executive all the way throughout the organization to the supervisory level.
So regarding teaching frontline leaders how to lead with coaching, how does that work? Can you be a manager coach?
Yeah, absolutely. And the trick in helping managers understand what they need to do in a given moment is for them to be able to take off the manager hat when they need to coach and put on the coach hat, and vice versa. When they need to tell the employee what they need to do, they need to put their manager hat back on. So it's kind of that awareness of when to be a coach and when to be a manager. And you can't be all things to all people, but just that awareness, I think, is helpful when a manager is taking on a coach approach.
So you've given us some great examples of who coaching is for. What are the benefits of coaching? In other words, you don't offer your time for free. Other coaches don't give away their time either. You're not a philanthropic organization.
Right.
You need to get paid.
Right.
So what is the ROI of coaching? If I come to you, or I find another executive coach or professional coach and say, I want to be coached, what can I expect to see in return? And how do I recognize the benefits of coaching? How would I go? Maybe this is the real question here. How do I go to my manager and say, boss, I'd like to get some coaching. Will you pay for it? What would compel the boss to write a check to my coach to get me some good coaching?
That's a great question, Mike. To a person, most clients will make a comment like this in terms of the benefit of coaching. A coach is typically a neutral outside voice, and they offer a different perspective that's indifferent and detached. Those two key words, indifferent and detached, are really important when it comes to coaching, because the coach doesn't have a vested interest in the outcomes of the coaching relationship other than to help the client succeed. They can be a neutral voice that's indifferent and detached.
Gary, that by the way, that's the first time I've ever heard someone described as indifferent and detached, and that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you. The three benefits I see, though, in terms of ROI, and we can qualify ROI. There's a formula we can attribute to coaching in terms of the business outcomes that a client is pursuing. So we can actually calculate our ROI, but let me give you three kind of broad categories: empowerment, support, and focus. All right, let me revisit each one of those briefly. Empowerment, the heavy lifting, like I mentioned earlier, in a coaching conversation includes listening and asking powerful questions. That's really the value of having a coach from the outside of an organization. Because going back to that principle we mentioned earlier, the things that you discover on your own, you are more likely to act on. And it's all about forward movement and growth. And leaders accelerate their growth when a coach facilitates the process of self-discovery versus telling people what they need to do, such as an expert. So empowerment is one of the key benefits that a coach can achieve with a teachable client. The second benefit is support. And I think this is where I would, as an employer, really want to lean into a employee who is asking for coaching, because I, as the employer, may not have the bandwidth to provide the support they need. Like in the example I gave earlier, in the second largest wine distribution company in the world, if they had the bandwidth to do coaching internally, they would have done it. But they needed somebody from the outside to kind of provide the support to help the supervisors adapt to a new style of working with people. The third area that I think is so critical as a benefit to coaching, number one is empowerment, number two is support, but number three is focus. I think focus is probably the key advantage of having someone walk alongside a business leader, is to keep them focused on the important and not urgent activities, like Covey used to say in that quadrant 2 matrix. I think the most important thing is the most important thing, okay? And coaching can help the leader keep their attention on those things that will make the biggest impact on their business. So the three benefits I see are empowerment, support, and focus. And all of those will contribute to skill development, new ways of operating within a team, new ways of developing vision and communicating that with people and engaging them in that. But that last little nugget I wanted to throw out there is that neutral third voice. Most executives, okay, and supervisors and small business owners don't have a safe place to process their stuff. All right. And coaching's all about personalized care and care for the whole person. And that third party, that neutral outside voice, can provide that safe place for them to process those kinds of issues.
I love that, Gary, because if we elevate the leader's skills, those skills are going to lead to improved outcomes, elevated performance that drive the bottom line.
Absolutely.
It may not happen overnight. It may not happen next week. Learning is a process, not an event. Growth and development are processes, not events. But over time, the impact is in fact measurable.
You said it better than I could, Mike. And it was funny. Yesterday, I was talking to a previous client, and he said, about 20 years ago, he said, I will never do my job without a coach. Well, it's been about, 15 years since we worked together, and he hasn't had a coach. So I'm re-engaging with him because he understands the value of what a coach brings to his development and his organization.
And I think business people understand value. The people who are listening to this podcast understand value. They are willing to exchange their time and money if they're receiving something of value. And I think we're just inviting people to think about the value of coaching today.
Agreed.
So how does a coaching relationship work? How does it start? How does it progress? How does it end, perhaps? Mm-hmm. Is it a lifetime commitment, or is it a shorter burst of engagement? Do you use tools and resources along the way? Just kind of tell folks what they might expect if they worked with you or any good coach for that matter.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's a good question because this is where the rubber meets the road. Ultimately, there's got to be a high level of trust between the coach and the client. And with that trust in place, or at least the foundations of that in place, they can now start talking about what the client really wants to achieve, what they want to pursue in that coaching relationship. And I always write that up in a coach agreement. And it lays out all of these logistical things that you would expect in a relationship of this type, like duration, frequency, preparation, evaluation, accountability, and costs. All those things would be spelled out in the coach agreement. But of course, we want to look at the objectives, measures, and gains as a result of the relationship. And that's really where the client needs to lean into this relationship and be very clear on what they want to achieve. The way it works is once a coach agreement is created, the sequence goes like this. There's typically, in my practice, 5 coaching appointments that the client is committed to, or we double that and say 10 appointments. That's usually the duration of that initial coach agreement. And then we schedule out appointments. Typically they're 55 minutes in length, but no more than 4 weeks in between appointments. The best way that you can leverage a coaching relationship is by talking to your friends and colleagues and ask them who they would recommend if they've ever had a coach, and then begin to explore those possibilities. 99% of my coaching practice comes from referrals. So it's one friend, one colleague telling another colleague. The Duration, though, that's an interesting question. I literally have had clients that I've been working with for 1 or 2 decades. And every year we just renew the coach agreement. But for the vast majority, most of the clients I work with are on an annual basis, 5 or 10 appointments, and then they will have what they need and they pivot on to what's next.
Got it. What about the tools you use in your practice? I have used certain learning tools, assessment, psychometrics in my work, and you may as well, along with tools that you've created. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about that, if you would.
All right. So the go-to tools that I've used over the years, most people are familiar with the DISC assessment. So it's a behavioral inventory. Another one is the Berkman. It's been modified to the GRIP Berkman, but it looks at behavioral styles, but in a little bit different way. And then Strengths Finder is obviously a popular one. And then I also do this exercise with a tool called the Leadership Timeline. We've also developed an online 360-degree coach assessment, which looks at the 9 competencies of a coach, gives us a baseline, and then helps us really target the areas that need to be focused in on. But let me give you the one tool that I really, really go to in most of my coaching. It's called the Harrison. You can Google it. It's one of the most robust trait assessments in the marketplace. And it looks at about 170 different traits, but it really tries to help people be aware of what their strengths are, and then to leverage those to the best of their ability in their job. And then we coach around those traits that are going to be most fulfilling, but also try to address the ones that are detracting from their joy on the job, if you will. So that's a kind of a plethora, but I think that Harrison is the one that I've been trained and certified in, that I've used over the last couple of years the most.
And in my work, I tend to lean into the SDI 2.0 that talks about motives and conflict and strengths. So different coaches are going to use different tools. And I would contend that many of these tools, most of them, in fact, have unique value. And so rely on your coach to choose a tool that would be useful in your relationship. We've identified a few here. So Gary, our time is just about up. I've loved this conversation, by the way.
Thank you, Mike.
What is something practical? Challenge our listeners with something that they can begin doing right away to benefit from this conversation we've had today.
Thanks, Mike. This is my opportunity to challenge the listeners to listen a little bit more and talk less. What I mean is, instead of always trying to get your point across, ask a question and listen. In fact, in your next conversation over the next 30 days, try to listen about 80% of the time and see what kind of engagement, what kind of response you get from the people that you interact with. And try to listen intently, periodically summarize what you hear them say, and then ask them if there's more. That's just a real simple coaching technique that's foundational to helping people self-discover.
So you don't need any special training for that, although for many of us, it's easier said than done. And I've discovered as I'm doing this podcast, I find myself in the role of listening more and talking less.
Yes.
And that's challenging to me, yet I recognize the power of that and my ability to learn and hopefully invite information from others that benefits anyone and everyone that listens to this podcast. So thank you for that, Gary. That is absolutely something that people can start doing now. And maybe you should try it with your spouse this evening to just practice a little bit if you've got a spouse. All right. So Gary, this is the chance for you to let people know how they can get in touch with you, anything that you want them to know about following you on social or just reaching out and staying connected with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, the easiest way is via email. My email address will be linked here, but it's Reinecke, Greinecke at infocusnet.org. You can sign up for our blog. I'll have that link there posted at the bottom. And then we're on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn under InFocus and Gary Reinecke.
Gary, thank you for being a great guest on the Mission First People Always Great Leaders, Great Teams podcast. I've enjoyed our conversations. I bet many of those who have listened have heard things about coaching that they haven't heard before, or you said it in a way that struck something for them that will make them consider coaching or at least think about it in a new light. So to my audience, thank you for listening. We're going to continue having these kind of conversations that are geared toward helping you become a better leader, a great leader, and setting you up for success with your team, better outcomes, working better together. Thanks for listening. See you next time. God bless.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.